So I think we've had a very, very productive day through the entire, sessions which started in the morning. As we come to the fag end of the day, I think we had reserved the most interesting session for the last so that the interest doesn't wane. Uh, you know, People say that when two elephants fight, the grass gets flattened. Sometimes what people forget is that the grass is needed by both these elephants. And in today's context, ladies and gentlemen, I think India is in a position to be the perfect foil in the current geopolitical context. And in that mode, we come to this session of ours, which is global risks and the advantage that India has in it. I'm delighted to have with us the former Union Minister and Member of Parliament, Shri Suresh Prabhuji. We have, in fact, I'll share a small nugget which Ajay mentioned outside. When PAFI first started, in the very first year, we had requested Sureshji to come and do the inauguration. And he was on his way to the airport at that time. He actually took a break, came to PAFI, inaugurated, and then went back to the airport. And I think history has shown PAFI has gone from strength to strength from that. And I think it's the auspicious introduction that Sureshji gave us. We also have with us today Pranjal, who is here as the economic analyst and author, who will be actually moderating the fireside chat with Sureshji. And of course, welcome Medha. Medha, who is the Vice President of Public Policy for South Asia for MasterCard and one of the co-founders of PAFI. So without further ado, Sureshji.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arjit. I don't want to go beyond what Arjit has said, but I think to hear Sureshji's views on some of the global issues that are facing us and where India is in the middle of it would be critical. And then, of course, we'd like to have as much of a vibrant conversation as possible. Sureshji, I'd request you to share some of your thoughts on how India can refashion and what is India's role in this era of uncertainty that we are in.
Good evening, friends. Thank you for inviting me for such a interesting, engaging, and very important event in which the professionals who spend a time on public affairs, they come together and organize this event to debate on so many challenges that we are all facing in India, in the world. And I seen in my so many years in public life, almost 26 years in the parliament, having handled 11 different cabinet positions, the role played by professionals who are in public affairs. They always contribute, do some value addition, provide different perspective. It's always helpful to get a perspective before you frame the policy and while you implement it. So I am very happy that I'm here today. So I'm very happy to be here, and as my dear friend Pranjal has said, I should speak about global challenges, global issues, global problems. I want to thank, of course, my dear friend Ajay Khanna for inviting me, and I came in specially for this program that day when you said when we were founding time, I was flying out. Today I flew in for this program. So I'm very happy to be here. But I don't know why he has kept this session on global problems just before the dinner. Because I speak all the problems, then I don't think you'll enjoy your dinner. Because we are in the midst of so many challenges in the world that if I'm released all, I'm sure you'll skip the dinner. So I think, but still, India being part of the global community, almost 20% of the population, maybe 18 now, but almost 20% by the time we are going into the future. And such time, world problems become our problems. And We must therefore address those issues for our own good as well as for a broader public good of the world. So, talking about them and just talking about few of them. So, one obviously is a problem related to economy. We know the problems of economy. World is slowing down, global economy is slowing down, and everybody, when it slows down, it is going to affect everybody. But I'm going to not talk about all that. We can go to the IMF website and you know better about how the world economy is going to do and what is going to happen. I'll just talk about one or two or few points on that. One is the most important aspect is the public debt that the world has accumulated. And I don't know whether English language, sometimes when you are in a crowd, you are listening to so many things, so you don't hear the word properly. So when somebody said debt, you can also hear a death. So the public debt is a real challenge that the world is facing of a different kind. Let us look at the largest economy of the world, US, which already has almost close to 140% of GDP to public debt ratio. And that was before the Congress passed the various laws to actually make good laws, necessary laws for dealing with climate change. And also it is claimed that it will be revenue neutral, so that it will not be causing any problem, but still it will have some implications. Also, this is before President Biden announced that all the student loans will be waived. How much of it is going to be there, how is it financed, and what no. But even before that, the public debt to GDP ratio of US is almost close to 150%. The second largest economy, China. So nobody knows how much is the public debt to GDP ratio really. But they are into midst of a real challenge. Why? Because the federal government sent inspectors to the provincial government to assess the debt levels of the provincial government. As you know, in China, very interesting model, though we always talk about democracy, the political democracy in China, there is a lot of economic democracy. That people at local level can take economic decisions. The mayor of Shanghai can decide about multi-billion-dollar projects. So as a result of that, the local governments have accumulated huge debt. And therefore, that debt, if you taken as a country's debt overall, it could also be a big challenge, though the exact number is still to be done. But taking at one issue, that one of the largest property developer of China, though it's not a public debt, it's a corporate debt, could not honor the commitment, and it is now snowballing into a big issue. The third largest economy of the world, Japan, has always been in perpetual debt. What is the public debt to Japan's public debt to GDP ratio? 263%, about beginning of this year. 263%. Now, in Japan, interestingly, that most of the debt, unlike other countries like US, most of the debt is foreign debt. Unlike that, in case of Japan, most of the debt is domestic debt. And because interest rates are low, the impact of that is not yet felt, but it is now estimated in the next 10 years' time. Incidentally, very interestingly, in Japan, 70% of Bank of Japan's assets are in government public debt. Can you imagine 70% of that? And now it is estimated in the next 10 years' time, the total public debt of Japan might exceed the total corporate assets. And at that time, it's going to have a very big impact on interest. And therefore, all these issues are going to weigh on the world economy. Three largest economies of the world. I'm not taking more what is happening in Italy. It is all, I'm not talking about that right now. But, so actually, it's a big challenge for the world economy is the public debt to GDP ratios. And that also raises so many other issues. How are you going to repay the debt? You can repay it only from the government income. Otherwise, or you borrow more. That's the only way you can repay the debt. That's called the spiraling debt cycle in which you can never come out. And so many countries are actually into that. But because of that, we'll have to raise interest, rather taxes. And taxes, when you raise taxes, who is going to pay for it? The debt will be repaid after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. So the people at that time will pay taxes. Whereas the benefits of that debt, whatever was the benefit, hopefully it was a benefit, that presumption benefit, has accrued to the previous generation. So it's an intergenerational issue, which is going to create a problem. I will talk about intergenerational issues, climate change, a little later. And it's also going to impact your ability to invest into public health, infrastructure, and everything else. So future growth will be very badly impacted. And as you know, the interest of the government when it is high, basically where the government gets money. We say government will raise taxes. Where is the tax comes from? You are an economist. Pranjal can tell you better. Pranjal is frank, so he'll tell you frankly. So you talk about that. All that comes from only one source, and that's domestic income, household incomes. Household incomes partly can go into savings. Savings can go to investment. Part of the domestic income will be charged by the government, so it becomes taxes. So ultimately, if you raise more taxes to pay, then it will also have a negative impact on future growth, because savings and investment will also be affected. And therefore, this is a very big challenge that we are going to face. And also, at a time, and I mention all this, at least barring US, because US keeps importing people from all parts of the world, though of course right now that's a big issue in US right now, because the governors of Florida, Texas are sending the refugees into the other states who are called liberal states. They went to Martha Vineyard the other day saying that you take care of the refugees, I don't want to take care of them, because you Democrats, you believe that refugee is a good idea, you take care of them. So they are planning to send some to White House. So, but still US gets the refugees and therefore it's something. But otherwise, other European countries, Japan, the big problem is aging population. So therefore the aging population means they will not be earning income. So where is the tax going to come from them? In fact, we will have to charge others to pay for it. So at a time when you have to pay for interest of the previous time, service the debt of taken in the past, at the same time putting this burden on this is going to be a very big issue. And therefore, looking at from the India's perspective, I would have said what India thought believes, whether this is a different thing, whether we have to work on that thought obviously, is that first spend within your means. And that's what I think one of the lessons that we are really facing. Other issue, of course, arising out of this is the impact that is going to have on global issues. At a time when we need more global cooperation, these kind of issues are going to keep domestic audience engaged with domestic issues. For example, already Make America Great Again campaign by President Trump, it is actually a manifestation of that. He is appealing to an audience saying that why we should get engaged with the rest of the world. We should solve our own problem. At a time when you cannot solve your own domestic problem unless you engage with the rest of the world, like climate change and others, I'll come to that. But at a time, also because we are not having public debt and the taxation is going to go into that, so that again is going to be a big problem of solving the global problem, because without global cooperation. So anti-global feelings are rising very clearly in Europe. Eurosceptics are gaining ground even in Italy. In the next few days, there is the new incoming Prime Minister, a lady, young lady. She is a very big Eurosceptic. Of course, she has still said now that I'll still remain with European Union. Earlier, her entire campaign was that. Why it is growing? And that's again because of these issues at a time when there are no global institutions to deal with global issues. UN has failed. WTO is under existential threat. Global trade, which can actually drive the global economy, which is also right now in problem, and the supply chains and other issues will also a problem. So at a time like this, and the global problem, one of the big global issue is employment. And that's one of the social issues, but also an economic issue. What kind of economic policies you follow will actually result into whether you create more jobs or not. And a big problem today is that economic growth may be there, and that we have seen that growth, in fact, incidentally, very interestingly, the growth that we have seen is something very interesting. In 1970, we had $3 trillion economy world. Today, we are 94 trillion. And if you take PPP, we are almost 145. So that's what we got. But jobs has been a problem, but we still could create, but in future, we are going to create more problems. For example, Elon Musk is saying that he is going to go for a fully autonomous cars. When that happens, what happens to drivers of the world? There's millions of jobs lost. Are there so millions of jobs will be created in the shop floor to make Tesla car? So this is going to be a major issue that we'll have to deal with, and that actually gives us a big issue of global issue. What is the relationship between technology, which is so necessary, and humans, and the inequality, which is economic growth is one part, inequality, and I think Pranjal will tell you, now the new popular economist Piketty said that one of the biggest challenge of the world is inequality than anything else, because that can also create problem. I'll not give you statistics about how inequality has risen. The second big global issue, the second means I already said a few, but another one is climate change. As we speak, the 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater. And that happened because of double whammy. Glaciers melting, huge rainfalls, so all the rivers breached and went into the fields. But still, it was only 2. It was not that area where it happened. Of course, Karachi is a scene where also it's happened, is also as a coast. But if you actually have another problem of climate change, which is sea level rise, and as a result of that, all those typhoons and others coming in, what would happen when you had double whammy, you have this problem. If you get all the manifestation of the risk associated with climate change happening at the same time, what would it happen? And India is the worst sufferer because India, firstly, the Himalayas, which is the water tower of the world, which gives us water not only to India, on this side of South Asia, not only India but entire South Asia, but the bulk part of South Asia, as well as on ASEAN through the Mekong River. So all of that is a threat, and at a time when the rivers of the world are drying up. Can you imagine? This is a phenomena which is very unusual. That biggest rivers, whether it's Colorado in the US, whether it's the Rhine in Europe, or whether in Tigris River in Iraq, most of the rivers of the world, including Yangtze River in China, which is the mightiest of the river, which are drying up. And this is going to be a big problem. Therefore, they are now discovering, in some river in Texas, they discovered the footmark of dinosaur. So I think we are going right now, that is also very good indicative of the nature that probably humans will also become part of dinosaurs very soon if we go like this. So this is a big issue of climate change, which is now really threatening our existence. Of course, as I said, and when Ajay was out, I was telling them that you kept my session just before the dinner and talking about problems. I said, nobody's going to have dinner after listening to the global problem. So one big issue now is geopolitics. Right now, I was just coming in and I was watching on my mobile that Russia's former president and former prime minister, both he has said that probably we can even use to defend a claimed territory by using even nuclear weapons. So just imagine that we thought we'll do so many treaties, so many ideas, and we'll be able to prevent it. But right now, it is right next to us. And as you know, if one country which has its possession of nuclear weapons uses it against other, I don't know, others are going to use lathis to counter it. So just imagine what could be the impact of all this is going to happen. And therefore, there are hotspots in the world which can create huge political challenge. So again, I don't want to mention, but this is a big, big issue that we have to face. And of course, democracy. Right now, there's a very interesting debate going on in the US, which is supposed to be, they should always tell the rest of the world about what democracy should be. And right now, the US is facing so many issues related to democracy. Right now, the MAGA movement and rest of the world is fighting each other. And at that time, the huge big issue is, so one is that political fight. But that raises some fundamental issues, and that's the future challenge. But what is the role of the state? What should be the state that should come? What should be the democratic institutions which can work in that deliverance of the state issues? And how we can actually satisfy the population, which really needs all this, because population is going to be very growing. So I think I'm just coming to now India's perspective, only just few minutes, last few minutes. So all these problems, climate change, geopolitical problems, economic issues, who created them? We can say climate change is something which always happened. So it happened too. But this one, which is proved by the UNFCCC as well as IPCC many times, that it is human-induced. So who created a problem? Human beings. So solution cannot be external. So you cannot say that there is a skin problem, so I apply some ointment and solve the problem. But skin problem may be a manifestation. There may be something inside me which is causing that skin irritation. So the real problem, and that's the Indian perspective you wanted me to tell you, is human being. So you have to change the human to change the world. And to do that, you have a philosophy from the Indian perspective which can be applied. We have to use it for ourselves first, obviously, but we can also use it globally, because all these philosophical thoughts are meant for humanity as a whole, not controlled by the boundary state borders. So we have to work on that, and there I think we have to use fresh ideas. So J. Krishnamurti would always say that the biggest enemy of you is your past. So don't go by your past experiences, which will weigh on your mind, and therefore you may take a wrong decision. So I think at this time, thinking fresh is something necessary, as was said by him. And again, as I said, because the human being is an issue, deal human beings. So, and that too, integrated humanism, which is something which we always wanted to work on that. And I think, as Gandhiji would say, the fear and anxiety which leads to threat to the world. So we have to work on this. And I think, therefore, changing the mindsets of people to work on this is very important. I know Prinjal is going to ask me so many questions, and he has given me limited time. Of course, the world itself has a limited time now. I think, as most of the top scientists are saying, that the way we are going, we have lived here for a few million years, but the way we are going, it doesn't look like that humanity has a future even of few centuries now, because the way we are going. And therefore, I was saying, changing our future can only be possible if we completely delink ourselves from the past in an effective manner. And that's what new ideas, new thoughts, it's what necessary. I think India can play that role in offering fresh solutions based on new thinking, which should encompass the whole world and focusing on human beings. We are talking about institutions, we are talking about all, but unless we focus on that person himself, because we try to build a paradise, we try to build an edifice, but we forgot that all is this meant for one person, and that's that individual, and we forgot them, and that's why we are facing these problems. Thank you.
So there are very few people who I know who can speak on such breadth of topics, from humanism to democracy, climate change, and technology. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I want to begin a little bit by talking about us, which is India. Ajay knows we were in Davos together, and the session on global crisis was only about Ukraine. Last week I was in France for another conference, and big family offices of European billionaires, they could not look beyond what's happening in Europe. For them, India and China were distant and some markets to exploit. The point is that when we look at where we are today, sir, India looks like an oasis of stability. If you look at the crisis, economic crisis in US, you look at the conflict in Europe. Actually, there's more conflict in Europe today than in Asia or in Africa, if you look at it. So India and our region is actually an oasis of stability. How do you see this once I map it to the fact that the center of gravity of the global economy is also shifted to our part of the world?
See, as you said, Europe seems to be, but Europe has always been that. In fact, if you look at First World War, Second World War, where was it started? What was the cause?
Actually, sir, I even say that they were not even world wars; they were European wars.
I'm saying so.
They were European wars. Africa, Latin America, Asia weren't involved.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying. So today that is the center of an issue, but that's always been the issue. See, today, as I said, in 1991, when that time Dr. Narasimha Rao started new economic reforms, and till that time India's GDP was hardly less than 10% probably, was globally connected. And today we are far bigger than that. Of course, still we are much smaller than many other countries in the world, and we should increase that. So today we are not that badly affected as an economic for us that reason, because we are not to that extent very so much connected. That so economy wise is fine, but at the same time, economy cannot grow in isolation. So we may think that whether we are exporting or importing, we are actually doing something which are connected with the rest of the world, either imports or export both. And more importantly, if you look at it, India gets almost about more than 83, I think probably currently maybe 85 billion dollars of remittances from the world. And that actually sustains our external account. So if you talk about economy, our external account, today we are running such huge current account deficit and trade deficit both. And therefore, I think the rupee has depreciated again today. Of course, that is for many other reasons, because US Fed has increased the interest rate, so that is going to impact. But the external sector, which is supported largely by remittances. So India's connection with the rest of the world is through many different channels, not just through imports and exports alone, not just through technology transfers, but also this is one of the very important channel of communication with the rest of the world. So any disturbance that happens in that part of the world, because we mainly get it from the Gulf and the Middle East, but we can also we get it from other sources. So that's again is going to have an impact. And if the global demand slows down, it has impact on so many things. If the commodity prices went up and that affected India very badly because we are importing so much of fossil fuels and hydrocarbons. So we have to, that it affected economy. So I think India is right now relatively in a better shape, but also it depends upon how the rest of the world events unfold. So we'll have to be very cautious, careful, and work in a manner that we'll be able to put safeguards around us.
I think India, sir, as you say, India has carved out a very special position for itself post-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID and post-Ukraine as well, where it has said very clearly that we are not in any specific bloc. We are on our side. At the same time, it's reinventing and redefining the relationship with Europe, with US, but perhaps also with China. And that's a very big question for us, because if there is one question that India needs to look at is how can India's economic relationship with China be reinvented, rebalanced? Can we, for example, collaborate on manufacturing? We've had a history of conflict, but can that be one of the features as we go ahead?
You know, it's a very interesting question. In fact, let me remember my days as a commerce industry minister. Actually, we had a very frank discussion with the Chinese. I had invited China's commerce minister to India. He was very senior in their political hierarchy. And I told him it is not sustainable that we keep increasing our trade, and only as a result of that, only thing that happens is our balance of trade gap increases. We import more from you than export. It's not sustainable. So we agreed, we prepared some sort of a roadmap. In fact, that year, at least to begin with, our exports had increased to China significantly, at least only that particular year. And the trade deficit also had gone a little bit down. So we have to work with Chinese, and we have to very clearly tell them that it is not going to work on one way. In fact, one of the suggestions, I'm not saying, I'm not taking credit for it, but I had suggested, why don't you organize this event only for importing into China rather than exporting? Actually, China now organizes a fair wherein no exporter can participate, only importers can participate. So this is a very unique event that happens in China. In fact, I had once I had suggested that. So I think we'll have to, as you correctly said, we have to redefine the economic relationship with China. We cannot afford to do it. Only issue is that because of the geopolitics, which based on us a border issue is still important to us. And therefore, if that is addressed, then probably even economic relation can be addressed. But absolutely right that it is not sustainable, not advisable, and not doable that China can only keep exporting more to India and we keep importing more, and the trade deficit widens year after year.
I really think, sir, that if India and China can be the US and Europe of the world for the next century, the way US and Europe defined economic growth and the world order in many ways, I think India and China can really, if they hold hands together, can really take over, because I think it is going to be the Asian century. I'd like to take a few questions. If we have some mics over there, I'll collect the questions. Please be brief and introduce yourself. Can we get the mics here, please? Right, sir. So, quick question from you, sir, and then we'll come to the gentleman here.
The question is, well, first I should say, my name is Naresh Singh. I'm from the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. And I really liked where Professor Prabhu ended when he said, we have this long list of all kinds of risks and problems. We seem to have forgotten that the leadership that India can show and the solutions might lie in remembering that it is us. Like we have seen the enemy and it is us, and we have sort of forgotten that. Just to say that in order to manage uncertainty and risk in the world today, all of these problems are coming from an interconnected global system at which the human being is the center. So what we have started to do is to teach complexity theory and public policy combined with applied spirituality and public policy in order to begin to go to the core of what human beings are. So my question to you, sir, is this the way to go forward? Would this begin to help us while we continue to do the public policy work, the international diplomacy work, the science and all of that? Don't we bring in this other dimension that we seem to have forgotten?
Thank you for your question. There's a gentleman over here. I think can you please stand up and ask your question? There's a mic coming to you.
Hello, sir. I am Adrish from Indian School of Public Policy. I'm a scholar there. So my question is that you had been a minister for both the NDA governments, and even you are a minister for railways and present at 3 railway budgets. So my main question is that once Mr. Murasoli Maran, who was the ex-minister, said that it's not bad states but mismanaged states. My question is, why do politicians at the state level love to mismanage the finance? And
That's an excellent question. Thank you very much. I don't think they love any other question because that'll be the last question. Anybody else? Tanmay.
The question is that whilst there is an external geopolitical disturbance all around us, we also parallelly have our own problems to solve. So question is, where do you think the balance should be or the prioritization should be? That do we get influenced by all that's going on around the world, or do we solve our own internal problems which are immense in terms of raising the level of economic sustainability of our own people, our healthcare system, our education system, our transportation system, our slumification of cities problems. There are immense problems that we have internally. So what is your allocation of prioritization to responding to external disturbances versus internal problems to be sorted out?
So over to you. I think question on complexity and leadership on states mismanagement, which also connects with what Tanmay said about managing our internal challenges. Managing our internal challenges. So what's your view on how do we manage our internal challenges, mismanagement at the state level, misgovernance, and the rising complexities?
Obviously, we are first and primarily responsible for our own citizens. So we have to solve our domestic problem for sure, there's no question about it. But because the session was titled like that, I was obviously speaking about it. So, but that doesn't mean that we are saying that there is no internal problem, therefore only, so that was never a premise or that was not a hypothesis in any case. But that's something which is obviously there, we have to solve this. And states, in a way, are very important. I think you are asking about state finances, something like that. State finances, no? See, basically, if you really look at it, see, ultimately I was giving example of China, where the local provincial government's borrowing is going to snowball into a crisis for nationally also. So obviously state finance, state are part of Union of India. So obviously any state has a financial problem, finally it will devolve upon the central government in any case. So we have to deal with that in a proper manner. We had done something when we were in Atal Bihari Vajpayee's, I was in that cabinet. We had made a Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. It was actually a very forward-looking act, and it had really, including contingent liabilities, which is normally the corporate balance sheets have to disclose. But in case of government also, we have talked about contingent liabilities. We had talked about issues related to that, and therefore there was actually quite a comprehensive document. Unfortunately, when we lost power in 2004, the new government that came in, the first thing they did was they said that we are increasing the applicability of FRBM by a few more years, and that's we diluted it, and then subsequently that act has remained as just probably as a guiding principle, like preamble to the constitution. So it's like that. But I think FRBM, Fiscal Responsive Budget Management Act, is the right forum to do that. I think this is very important that we must deal with. See, actually speaking, something which why I started with public finances. If you may think that we are all, most of you are organizing this event, are working in corporates, many of you in multinational corporations. So corporates cannot think that this is nothing to do with us, this is a private, public finance is a public issue. We have nothing to do with this. And therefore I was giving example about where do you get the money finally from? From the household. If household don't spend, obviously corporates will not get demand for the goods or services. So therefore they have to spend. To spend, they have to have income. Okay. Then to saving, if you don't save, you will not have investment. So where the corporates were going to raise money from primary or secondary market, where are they going to get money? So public finance is not just public finance related to some public debate sometime to be forgotten. This is an issue which is life and death issue for every citizen of India, because his household income is finally preempted as taxes or being used and diverted to some productive purposes like savings and investment. So I think, and or the consumption, which is what is going to really ultimately result into demand for goods and services. So I think ultimately it's a very complex, it's a very important issue. So public finance is not just to debate it in parliament, and that's all. Of course, that we don't debate that much is a different issue. But that is what we really need to work on that. And therefore, I think when I became MP for the first time, I had written a letter to all the corporate heads that at that time the public finances were in a different, better position. I had said that we must deal with the issue because this is going to affect the corporates. Many of the leaders from the industrial world did not think that it is their problem. They thought it is public finance is public problem. And now in India, public problem is nobody's problem. So we don't have to worry about it. So we actually ignored it to our own peril. But I think this is very important, and I fully agree with you, the domestic issues are still important. But while saying that, so many global issues impact and they become domestic issues far more complex. One is climate change, or even economic issues, or issues like what happens once you have a war like that starts in nuclear basis. Then, I mean, you cannot just keep away from it. You cannot say keep watching. That's why our Prime Minister had to tell the President of Russia there is not time for war, because that was a very sane advice that he gave. So I think we have to work very carefully. And for I didn't get your question. What did he say? Is this what he
He's talking about complexity and leadership, sir. Managing complexity and what kind of leadership is required for that.
Oh, okay. I know. He has told me. So I.
Public policy and spirituality.
No, that actually speaking, honestly speaking.
I think these are 2-hour sessions actually, both these topics.
You know, the public policy and not religion but spirituality, as you're saying, which is absolutely interrelated. I was just now giving some example. If you want, I will just give one interesting quote on some of these issues we just mentioned anyway. I don't want to get into those because I'm not a spiritual leader anyway. But I will tell you, I can give from some of the old scriptures how if you follow them with so many global problems will not exist to begin with. So I think the public leadership has to have spirituality part of it. And what is spirituality is something which is not ritualistic but spiritual. Spiritual, ritual, they are very two different things. And unless we can raise our level of public discourse to a spiritual level, in which we then start understanding the human beings, and that's what I was saying. Spirituality, where spiritualism starts? It starts with the human mind. Why all spiritual minded people will tell you that you first change yourself before you change the world. If you change yourself, the world will change anyway. So I think that's what spiritual. So going inside you is very important. And for going inside you, you must have that ability to think. And therefore, all problems, that's what I ended my speech by saying, starts because we are not really focused on that individual. And focusing on individuals is something which is spiritual, really speaking.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I know we can continue this discussion for much longer, but we have to end this, and I'd like to now hand it over to Medha.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Is this working? Okay, great. Thanks so much, Pranjal, and thanks so much, Mr. Prabhu, for raising some very pertinent questions. I think you very rightly said that India is in a better shape today. I think we've had some great accomplishments in reducing the use of cash, improving the ease of living, ease of doing business. And I think the COVID-19 management program was something which has been watched by the world. It's replicable, it's scalable, and the largest COVID vaccination program, in fact, is what India ran and ran it successfully in record time, and that too purely digitally. So India certainly is in a good position, and not exactly spiritual values, but we do have societal values which we stand for, which India has imbibed over the years, whether they're of equitable distribution of wealth, a peaceful and sustainable way of living, and dedication to the service of others. And I'm sure that these values, as you all also rightly said, sir, will find a wide range of application in resolving global issues ranging from supply chains, building resilient supply chains and value chains, and also battling climate change. Once again, sir, on behalf of PAFI, thank you very much. May I please request Pranjal you to hand over a token of appreciation to Mr. Prabhu. And thank you to all the delegates who've joined us here today.
Thanks, Medha. Yeah, Medha, can you just join for the photo op? Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Prabhu. Thanks, Pranjal. Thanks, Arijit. Thanks, Medha. And with this, we come to the formal session of this session. And I would request Medha to make a brief announcement for the next activity that's going to happen shortly. And I just want to remind everybody right now that tomorrow morning, please reach here by 9:30 a.m. And please do bring your badges with you, okay? Because you'll be needing these badges again tomorrow morning also. So over to Medha for the brief announcement.
Sure, thanks, Deepak. So once again, thanks to everybody who's joined us today. I wish all of us a lot of energy and enthusiasm, share trust and resolve in achieving India at 100. Ladies and gentlemen, the bar is open. Please continue the discussions over a glass of drink, and we'll come back soon and we'll wrap up the evening on a rather exciting musical note, but the evening hasn't ended yet. Please continue the discussions, grab a drink, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.